The Alpha's pup cried continuously in the castle until the poor Omega girl did the unthinkable. The castle stood atop jagged cliffs, half hidden in mist, as though the mountains themselves wished to swallow it whole. Its towers pierced the gray skies, their shadows long and twisted like the secrets within. Inside, the walls whispered of old curses, of kings and queens who had ruled with iron and fear, of bloodlines marked by power no one could fully understand. Yet tonight, no ghost or shadow stirred more than a single, aching cry, the cry of the Alpha's pup. No one could soothe him, not the royal nurses who had tended generations of heirs, not the magicians who whispered incantations that bent the air with magic. The child's wailing echoed through every hall, climbing the stairs like smoke, curling into the high, arched ceilings and rattling the very stones. It was said the sound carried sorrow older than the mountains themselves. In the dim corridors, the castle servants moved quietly, fearful of being caught in the pup's sorrow. Some whispered that the crying was not natural, that it was tied to the curse of the Alpha's family, a curse that had begun centuries ago, when a queen had defied an ancient spirit. Others said it was simply the grief of a child born to a world too heavy for small shoulders. The Omega girl, known to the castle only by her gentle, quiet presence, moved among them unnoticed. She was slight, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that seemed to catch the light like fallen amber. No one knew from where she had come, only that the Alpha had taken her in as a ward. Unlike the other servants, she did not fear the cries. Instead, she felt them. The sound reached deep into her chest, pulling at her like a tether she could not resist. Tonight she could no longer ignore it. She moved toward the nursery, each step echoing in the cold hallways. The moonlight spilled across the stones in pale streaks, highlighting the frost that had crept through the windows. She paused at the carved wooden door, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the iron handle. Inside, the room was lit by candlelight, flickering against tapestries that told stories of battles and victories, of heroes and monsters. The pup lay in a carved cradle, small and fragile, his eyes wide and filled with tears. His tiny fists batted at the air as if he could chase away some invisible sorrow. The Omega girl knelt beside him. She did not speak at first. She simply watched, her own heart aching at the helplessness in his gaze. Then she whispered softly, words she had learned long ago from her own grandmother, a song of comfort older than the mountains. It was not a song of magic, not a spell, but something simpler, a lullaby that spoke of safety, warmth, and hope. At first, nothing happened. The pup's cries grew louder, more desperate, until even the walls seemed to shudder. But the Omega girl did not stop. She hummed, her voice steady, carrying through the small room like a river of light. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the child's cries faltered. His tiny body trembled, then relaxed, and his eyes, wide and watery, searched hers. The moment was fragile, a thread suspended over the abyss. And then a sound echoed behind the cradle, a low, cautious clearing of a throat. The Omega girl turned and saw him, the Alpha himself, standing in the doorway. His presence filled the room, tall and commanding, cloaked in darkness as much as authority. His eyes, sharp and gray like winter stones, studied her. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and dangerous, though there was something in it, a note of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "I had to try," the Omega girl replied softly, not daring to meet his gaze fully. "No one else could calm him. I can feel what he feels, if only a little." The Alpha's eyes flicked to the pup, then back to her. For a long moment the room was silent, broken only by the child's soft whimpers. Then the Alpha stepped forward, his long shadow falling across the floor. "You feel much for one so small," he said, "and yet you do not belong to this castle. Why do you care so much for what is not yours?" "I have always cared for what is in need," she answered, her voice steady now. "Even if it frightens me." The Alpha said nothing more. He simply watched, and in his gaze she felt both scrutiny and something else, a stirring of something she did not understand. And in that silence the pup reached out, tiny hands grasping her sleeve, and for the first time since birth, a soft, almost musical sigh escaped his lips. The crying had faded, replaced by a fragile calm. The alpha stepped closer. "Interesting," he said finally. "It has been said that my family is cursed, that no child born to us can know peace until the curse is broken. And yet you seem to touch him in a way no one else can." The Omega girl's heart skipped. She had heard rumors of the curse, whispered among the castle's shadows, that the bloodline of the Alpha was tied to sorrow, that happiness was forbidden, and that every heir carried a burden heavier than their small bodies could bear. And now she realized that she might be more than a servant. Perhaps, in some small way, she was part of the story itself. The Alpha knelt slightly, closer to the pup, his strong hands hovering as if unsure how to touch without disturbing the fragile peace. "And you," he said, turning his eyes on her again, "what is your name?" "Elijah," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Elijah," he repeated, tasting the sound. "Strange name for a strange girl." The pup wriggled, reaching for her again, and in that moment Elijah understood something powerful. The cries were not just sorrow, they were a signal, a bond between the child and the world that had cursed him. The cries were an echo of the past, of the pain that had been handed down through generations. And perhaps she could do what no one else could: soften it, soothe it, and in time change the course of fate. Outside the nursery, the castle walls groaned as the wind picked up, rattling windows and stirring the tapestries. Shadows danced across the stone floors as if alive, watching, waiting. Elijah hummed again, softly this time, a melody older than the Alpha's memory. The pup's eyelids grew heavy, and at last he fell asleep, his tiny body curling into a peaceful ball. The Alpha stood, a shadow of a man uncertain of himself. He looked at Elijah, and for the first time his expression softened, though there was still the weight of command and legacy pressing upon him. "Do not think this changes anything," he said quietly. "The curse of the danger, it does not end with a lullaby." "I know," she replied. "But perhaps it can begin to change something, if only a little." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, and the quiet between them stretched. Then he turned and left the room, his cloak sweeping the floor like a shadow, leaving Elijah alone with the pup in the candlelight. Alone, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief, but she also felt something else, a tremor of unease. The castle was alive with secrets, with magic, with eyes that watched from places unseen, and she knew that tonight was only the beginning. The cries had been silenced but not defeated. The threads of fate had begun to twist in new patterns, pulling her deeper into the Alpha's world, and into a destiny she could not yet understand. As she rose to leave, a cold breeze stirred, extinguishing the candles in a sudden puff. Shadows crowded the corners of the room, and a whisper seemed to brush past her ear. "One touch will change everything, and nothing will be as it was." Elijah shivered, but she did not flee. She had touched the child, had felt his sorrow, had glimpsed the bond that tied the past to the present. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark of determination ignited. She would not run from this fate. The castle was vast, filled with corridors and secrets, but she would walk them all if it meant understanding, if it meant helping the pup, if it meant standing before the Alpha and facing whatever storm the future held. Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying with it the echoes of cries past and whispers yet to come. Inside, a small child slept peacefully, unaware of the heavy hands of history that clutched at his tiny heart. And in the quiet, Elijah whispered a promise. "I will not let the sorrow claim you, not while I breathe." The castle held its breath, waiting, and somewhere deep in the stone walls and forgotten towers, the curse stirred, as if recognizing a new player had entered the game. The Alpha's pup had been calmed for now. But the story had only just begun. Morning came slow to the castle atop the cliffs, as if the sun itself feared the shadows that clung to the towers. Mist swirled around the stone walls, hiding the jagged paths below, and the wind carried a cold scent of rain and the sea. Inside, the castle felt quieter than usual. The pup slept peacefully in his cradle, his small chest rising and falling with calm breaths. But outside the nursery, in the corridors lined with carved stone and frozen tapestries, the tension remained. Elijah moved softly, her feet bare against the cold floor. Her hair fell over her shoulders like a river of amber light. She had spent the night beside the pup, humming lullabies and watching over him, sensing that his cries were more than just sorrow. They were a message, a thread that connected him to forces unseen. And now, as the first pale sunlight fell through the tall windows, she felt a new weight pressing upon her. The alpha had not returned to the nursery after last night. He had walked away, his dark cloak sweeping the floor, leaving behind silence and a question that hung in the air. What power does this girl truly hold? Elijah did not know herself. All she knew was that the pup's cries had touched her soul in a way she could not explain, that a bond had formed between them, fragile yet strong, and that it might be the key to breaking the ancient curse. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. A young servant, pale and nervous, peeked into the room. "Mistress, the alpha requests your presence in the hall. Something has happened." Elijah's heart quickened. "Something?" she asked, but the boy had already retreated, leaving only the sound of his hurried steps echoing down the corridor. She dressed quickly in a simple gown, her hands trembling slightly. She had expected to be ignored or at most scolded for entering the nursery without permission, but she did not expect the alpha to call for her personally. And yet, she felt no fear, not fully, only curiosity and a quiet determination that she could not explain. The great hall was immense, lined with banners of the alpha's family, symbols of power long steeped in history. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting narrow golden bars across the stone floor. And there he was, standing near the dais, tall and commanding as always, but there was tension in his posture, an unusual heaviness in his gray eyes. Elijah approached cautiously. "You asked for me, Alpha." He did not answer immediately. His eyes swept over her, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the calm determination in her gaze, and then he gestured toward the far corner of the hall. There, moving like shadows across the floor, were dark figures, their forms thin and twisted, whispering words that made the air itself shiver. "The pup's cries, they have attracted them," he said finally, his voice low. "Shadow creatures bound to the curse. They have been waiting for centuries, watching for a chance to claim the air." Elijah's stomach tightened. She had heard of the curse in whispers, of creatures bound to it, of dark sorcery that could twist life and death alike. And now she understood in the deepest part of her being that the cries were not just sorrow, they were a beacon, calling to these creatures, and perhaps, even worse, to forces she could not see. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. The alpha studied her, the first flicker of surprise crossing his features. "You," he began slowly, "have a power no one else seems to possess." When you sang to him, he calmed. No spell, no potion, no magic of the court could soothe him. It is as if you can touch his soul directly. Elijah's pulse quickened. She had never considered herself powerful. She had only felt and responded, and yet, perhaps there was more to her than she knew. Perhaps her bond with the pup was not accidental but destined. "You will need to stay close to him," the alpha said, his voice low but firm. "The shadows are patient, they will come again, and when they do, you must be ready." Elijah nodded. She did not know how she would fight shadows she could barely see or magic older than the mountains, but she felt a determination that surprised even her. Somehow, she would protect the pup. Somehow, she would face whatever darkness waited for them. Days passed in a blur of quiet vigilance. Elijah spent every waking hour beside the pup, humming lullabies and whispering soft words of comfort. and with each passing day, she discovered something extraordinary. The pup responded not only to her voice but to her presence. If she thought kindly, his small fingers would curl around hers. If she focused her energy on calming him, the shadows that lingered at the edges of the castle seemed to falter, as if her will could push them back. The alpha watched her, often from a distance. He tried not to interfere, tried to observe without intrusion, but he could not deny the stirring within him, a mixture of admiration, unease, and something far deeper. There was a gentleness to Elijah that seemed impossible in the harsh world of the castle, and yet it worked, bending the impossible to her will. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs and the sky turned to bruised shades of purple and red, the castle trembled. The shadows gathered once more, darker than before, their whispers curling into the hallways like smoke. The alpha entered the nursery to find Elijah standing over the pup, her hands glowing faintly with a pale light she did not recognize herself. "Elijah," he said, his voice tense, "what are you doing?" "I am keeping him safe," she said simply. "I do not know how, but I can feel something. The shadows hesitate when I focus." The alpha's gray eyes narrowed. "You are dangerous," he said, almost to himself. "Not in a way that harms, but in a way that could change everything." The shadows did not advance that night. They lingered, whispering threats, and then faded into the corners of the castle, as if wary of her presence. The alpha remained silent, watching, unsure whether to trust the girl or fear the unknown power she carried. That night, Elijah lay beside the pup as he slept, and she whispered words she had never spoken before. Words of hope, of courage, of light in a world that had known too much shadow. And in that moment, she realized that her bond with the pup was not only about calming him, it was about understanding him, and in turn, understanding herself. As she closed her eyes, a memory flickered in her mind, a fragment of a song her grandmother had sung long ago. It was a lullaby not just of comfort, but of strength. She hummed it softly, and the pup stirred, his small hands reaching for her. For the first time, he spoke a word, a name that made her heart catch. Elijah, the alpha, standing in the doorway, froze. He had not expected the pup to speak at all, let alone call the girl by name. His heart tightened in ways he could not understand. Something about the connection between them was stronger than any magic he had known. "You are tied to him," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I thought, more than the curse itself intended." Elijah did not answer. She could not. She felt the bond in every fiber of her being, a tether stronger than fear, stronger than the shadows, stronger even than the alpha's gaze. In the days that followed, the castle seemed to shift. Hidden chambers were revealed, faint whispers drifted through the walls, and the pup's cries became less frequent, replaced by murmurs and laughter that seemed almost unnatural in their sweetness. Yet with every moment of peace came the knowledge that darkness waited. The shadow creatures, the remnants of the curse, would not be denied. One night, as a storm raged outside and lightning split the sky, the alpha and Elijah found themselves alone in the great hall. The pup slept soundly in his cradle, but the wind howled as if the castle itself were warning them. "You have changed him," the alpha said, his voice rough with emotion he could not name. "You have done what no one else could, and yet—" He paused, and the shadows from the corners of the hall seemed to stretch toward him, then retreat, as if sensing his doubt. "Yet I fear the cost. There is power in what you do, Elijah, power that could save him or destroy everything we hold dear." Elijah met his gaze steadily. "I do not know the cost," she said softly, "but I will not stop. I cannot stop. If I do, he will suffer, and I will never forgive myself." The alpha's expression softened, but there was still tension in his shoulders, uncertainty in his eyes. "Very well," he said finally. "Then we prepare. For the shadows will come again, and this time they will not be content to watch." Outside, the storm raged, lightning striking the towers and illuminating the castle in stark, flickering light. Within, Elijah felt a strange warmth, a strength she had never known. The pup stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly, and for the first time she felt the full weight of her bond with him. She understood deep in her bones that the path ahead would demand courage, sacrifice, and a bravery she had never imagined. And she was ready, because she knew as the shadows whispered against the walls that this was only the beginning. The curse was ancient. The darkness was patient. And she, Elijah, might be the only hope to face both. The castle groaned under the weight of the storm, its towers swaying in the wind like ancient sentinels struggling against the tide of centuries. Inside, the halls were dim, lit only by flickering torches and the occasional flash of lightning that painted the walls in stark, moving shadows. The pup slept, but not peacefully. Even in slumber, his small body twitched as if sensing the dark presence creeping closer. Elijah stood in the nursery doorway, her hands clasped tightly before her. She had felt it all day, the pull of unseen eyes, the cold whisper of shadows in corners where no light reached. She had learned to calm the pup, to soothe his cries, and yet she knew that the danger lurking beyond the walls was patient, cunning, and growing bolder with each passing hour. The alpha appeared behind her, silent as a shadow, his cloak brushing the floor. His gray eyes were sharp, scanning the nursery, but more than that, they were searching her, searching for a courage, a strength that even she did not yet fully understand. "They are closer now," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "The shadow creatures. They test us, probing for weakness, and they will not stop until they find it." Elijah swallowed. I know, I can feel them, but I don't understand how I can stop them." The alpha's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You are not meant to understand fully. You are meant to act. To protect him, and perhaps to make the choice that no one else could bear." She looked at him, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "Choice? What choice?" He hesitated, as if reluctant to speak the words. "The curse is tied to the bloodline. The pup's cries are not merely sorrow, they are a tether, a signal. They bind him to the curse, to the shadow creatures, and to the fate of our family. To break it, someone must touch the tether directly. Someone must risk their own essence, their own being. The act is considered unthinkable. And yet," his voice trailed, but the meaning hung in the room like the scent of a storm. Elijah's heart pounded. She had cared for the pup, yes, but the idea of risking herself, the thought terrified her. She had never considered herself brave in such a way. And yet, as she looked at the small, fragile child sleeping peacefully, she felt something stir deep within, a strength she had never known. I will try," she said softly. The alpha's eyes widened slightly, and then he nodded. "You do not yet know the full danger. The act you perform will not only risk your life, but it may bind you to him forever. Or worse." He let the sentence hang. "Worse is beyond what most can imagine." Elijah's hands trembled. She took a step closer to the pup, feeling the warmth of his tiny body beneath the blanket. His small chest rose and fell, and she could see the tension in his hands, even in sleep. She knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "You are not alone," she whispered. "I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." The alpha stepped back, giving her space. "Then prepare yourself, focus. When the shadows come, and they will, you must act without hesitation." Night fell, thick and suffocating. The storm raged outside, lashing rain against the tall windows. Within the castle, the shadows moved like liquid, curling along the walls and seeping beneath the doors. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of magic, and every creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down Elijah's spine. She stood over the pup, feeling the bond between them pulsing stronger than ever. His cries had become whispers, small, urgent murmurs that tugged at her very soul. And she realized the truth. The tether was not just the curse. It was the child's essence, fragile and open, calling to something in her own being. And she was ready. The first shadow struck just past midnight. It slithered along the floor, blacker than the darkness itself, moving with intent. Elijah's heart hammered, but she did not flinch. She raised her hands, focusing on the small warmth that seemed to radiate from her chest, a light that had grown steadily with her care of the pup. The shadow recoiled, hissing like a storm-swept sea. The alpha appeared beside her, sword drawn, eyes sharp. "Do not falter," he said. "If you hesitate, it will consume him." Elijah inhaled deeply. She reached out, not with sword or spell, but with herself, her energy, her presence, her courage. The tether flared, bright and wild, linking her to the pup in a bond of shared breath and heartbeat. The shadows writhed and screamed, but they could not break the connection. And then she felt it, the unthinkable choice. The pup's tether was fragile, yes, but to sever the curse she had to give a part of herself, a fragment of her life force to intertwine with his. It would be painful. It could leave her, changed forever. But if she did not act, the shadows would consume him, and the castle would fall into despair once more. Elijah's hands shook as she placed them gently on the pup's small chest. She whispered a prayer, a promise, a lullaby. "I will bear this with you," she murmured. "I will share your burden." The shadows surged, black tendrils reaching for the pup, for her, for the light that flickered between them. But Elijah did not move. She let the tether flow through her, feeling the pup's essence mingle with her own, a warmth and strength she had never known. Pain shot through her chest, bright and white, but she did not scream. She focused only on the child, on the bond, on the hope that this act could change everything. The alpha watched, his sword raised, heart tight. He wanted to intervene, to stop her, to protect her, but he could not. He realized in a flash of understanding that this was not a battle he could fight with steel or command. This was something greater, older, and more profound than his authority. The tether glowed, a light brighter than any torch, filling the nursery with a warmth that pushed back the shadows. They shrieked, curling back from the force, unable to withstand the combined strength of Elijah's courage and the pup's innocence. The storm outside seemed to echo the battle within, lightning flashing in time with the pulses of light that connected them. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed. Time seemed to stretch and warp as the act unfolded. Elijah felt her strength faltering, her mind teetering on the edge of exhaustion, but she refused to let go. She whispered to the pup words of comfort, of hope, of light. The pup's small fingers clutched hers tightly, anchoring her to him, grounding her in the moment. Finally, with a final surge of energy, the shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners of the castle where light could not reach. The tether pulsed once, then faded, leaving behind a fragile piece. The pup slept truly and deeply, his breathing calm and even. Elijah collapsed beside him, gasping for breath, her hands trembling, her body weak from the strain. The alpha rushed forward, kneeling beside her, his gray eyes wide with awe and concern. You did it," he said, voice tight. "I did not think it possible. You have changed him and perhaps even the curse itself." Elijah shook her head weakly. I do not know. I only did what I had to. I could not let him suffer." The alpha reached out, gently lifting her hand to his lips, a rare gesture of both respect and gratitude. "You have a courage I have never seen, and a heart stronger than I imagined." For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the gentle rain against the windows and the soft breathing of the pup. The alpha studied her, and she met his gaze, feeling the weight of unspoken words, of connection, of something deeper than authority or duty. "You are tied to him now," he said quietly, "and to the castle, to the bloodline. This is only the beginning. The shadows may retreat for now, but they are patient, and they will return." Elijah nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had faced the unthinkable, risked herself, and protected the child. But she knew, deep in her bones, that the struggle was far from over. The bond she shared with the pup had altered the balance of power, awakened forces she did not yet fully understand, and drawn the attention of creatures older and darker than any she had faced. Yet in that moment, amidst exhaustion and the lingering fear of what was yet to come, Elijah felt something else, a quiet triumph, a fragile hope, and a connection that could withstand even the oldest curses. The alpha remained by her side, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel something beyond command, beyond duty. Admiration, respect, and perhaps a deep, unspoken longing. He did not act on it, but he could not deny it. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the castle drenched and shimmering under the moonlight. The pup slept soundly, the shadows recoiled, and the castle seemed to breathe, as if recognizing a new balance had been struck. But deep within the walls, in the forgotten corners where shadows lingered, there stirred a darker presence, one that had watched the entire act and had taken note. The curse was not broken. It had merely shifted, waiting for the next opportunity, and now it had a new target. And somewhere in the quiet of the nursery, the pup murmured a single word in his sleep, a name carried on the wind: Elijah. The castle trembled softly, as if acknowledging that the future had changed forever, and that the unthinkable had only just begun. Dawn broke slowly over the cliffs, spilling pale gold and soft rose across the castle towers. The storm had passed, leaving the world wet and glimmering, the stones slick with rain. Inside, the castle breathed in quiet relief, but the echoes of the shadows still lingered, like memories that refused to die. Elijah sat beside the pup's cradle, her hands resting lightly on the small, sleeping form. His chest rose and fell evenly, and for the first time since his birth, there was no tremor of sorrow, no sharp cry to pierce the halls. She felt the tether that had bound them during the unthinkable act, now pulsing gently like a heartbeat shared between two souls. It was fragile, yes, but strong. The alpha entered quietly, his cloak trailing across the floor. He paused at the doorway, watching her with eyes that held both awe and gratitude. For the first time, he allowed himself to step into the warmth of the morning, unguarded. "He sleeps," Elijah said softly, almost to herself. The alpha nodded. "Because of you. Because of your courage, your heart, and your bond with him. No one else could have done what you did." Elijah glanced up, meeting his gaze. There was a moment of silence between them, a quiet understanding that stretched beyond words. She had risked herself, faced the shadows, and intertwined her essence with the pup's. And now, the castle itself seemed to recognize a new balance, but the shadows had not entirely vanished. Deep within the forgotten corners of the castle, hidden corridors and sealed chambers whispered of dark forces still watching, waiting. The curse was old and patient. Even as peace filled the nursery, Elijah knew that vigilance would always be necessary. The alpha stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "You are bound to him now," he said, "and through him to this castle. Your bond has altered the legacy of my bloodline." Elijah nodded, feeling the truth of his words in every fiber of her being. She had expected fear, perhaps even regret after the unthinkable choice. But instead, she felt a strange sense of awakening. The act had changed her, yes, but it had also revealed strength she had never known. Courage, resilience, and a deep connection to life itself. Outside, the castle walls shone in the morning light, and the first birds of spring sang in the gardens below. It was a new beginning, fragile but undeniable. The pup stirred, opening his eyes for the first time without tears. He reached out instinctively, and Elijah took his tiny hand, holding it gently. "You are safe," she whispered. "Always." The alpha watched, his expression softening. And yet, safety is not guaranteed. Darkness still lingers. Shadows may return, and the curse is not entirely broken. But you have given us hope. Days passed in a delicate rhythm. The pup thrived under Elijah's care, growing stronger and more joyful with each passing moment. And as he flourished, so too did the bond between her and the alpha. It was a bond built not on fear, nor on obligation, but on mutual respect, admiration, and a quiet, unspoken affection. The alpha, who had always ruled with iron and authority, began to soften. He observed her not only as a guardian of the child, but as a partner in the trials of the castle. And Elijah, who had once felt powerless in the face of shadows and curses, now stood as an equal, her courage and heart shaping the destiny of the pup, the castle, and the bloodline itself. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the hallways, the Alpha led Elijah to a hidden chamber she had never seen. Its walls were lined with ancient texts and glowing runes, relics of magic older than the mountains. "This is where the curse began," he said, his voice reverent. "Long ago, a queen defied the spirits of this land. Her choices cast a shadow over every heir that followed, but you have begun to undo it. The bond you share with the pup is the first step toward redemption." Elijah walked carefully among the relics, her fingers tracing the glowing symbols. "I did what I had to," she said softly. "I did not think of power or magic. I only wanted to save him." The Alpha studied her. "That is what makes your courage true. Others would have feared, fled, or fought blindly, but you understood the bond, and through understanding, you changed fate itself." The pup's laughter echoed down the corridors, a sound pure and bright. The Alpha and Elijah exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement that the castle had shifted. Where once there had been only shadows and sorrow, now there was hope, fragile and golden. But even as the warmth of that moment filled the chamber, a whisper brushed against the edges of their consciousness. The shadows may have retreated, but the magic of the castle was alive, aware, and watching. Elijah felt a pulse beneath her skin, a reminder that vigilance was eternal. The unthinkable act had altered fate, yes, but it had not ended the trials. In the following days, the Alpha and Elijah worked together, tending the pup, exploring the castle, and discovering the hidden layers of magic that had long lain dormant. Elijah's powers, once timid and unknown, grew steadily. She could sense the echoes of the past, the whispers of the walls, and the faint threads of magic binding the castle and its inhabitants. The Alpha observed her quietly, often standing at the threshold of the nursery, watching as she sang to the pup, her voice carrying light into every shadowed corner. And he felt a shift within himself, too, a softening of the iron that had always ruled him, a growing admiration and an unspoken longing that he could neither name nor resist. One night, beneath the pale light of the moon, Elijah sat beside the pup as he slept peacefully. She traced patterns on his tiny hand and whispered, "We have come far, but our journey is not over." The Alpha entered quietly, sitting beside her. "No," he agreed, "but you have given us something stronger than fear, stronger than magic, stronger than the curse itself. You have given us hope, and perhaps something more." Elijah glanced at him, her heart fluttering. She had risked herself in the unthinkable act, and in return she had found not only strength but connection, an understanding that transcended fear, duty, and even destiny. "Something more," she whispered, a small smile lifting her lips. The Alpha reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Yes," he said softly. "For the first time I believe that light and courage can endure. That bonds forged in compassion and bravery can outlast even the darkest magic." The castle, silent and towering around them, seemed to hum in agreement. The curse had been challenged. The shadows had been pushed back. And the future, uncertain, fragile, yet shimmering with possibility, lay ahead, shaped by the unthinkable courage of one small Omega girl. Outside, the first birds of spring sang their songs of renewal, carrying hope through the misted towers and across the cliffs. The pup stirred, opening his eyes and smiling, a small, radiant smile untouched by tears or sorrow. He reached out for Elijah and she took him into her arms, holding him close, feeling the gentle pulse of the bond they shared. "You are safe," she whispered again. "Always." The Alpha knelt beside them, his eyes soft, a rare vulnerability shining through. "Thanks to you," he said, "we are all safe, and stronger than before." For the first time in generations, the castle felt alive with light rather than shadows. The corridors whispered not of curses, but of hope. The walls no longer carried only echoes of sorrow, but the promise of redemption, of courage, and of love born from compassion and bravery. The unthinkable act had changed everything. The pup's cries had been silenced, the shadows pushed back, and the bond between Elijah, the child, and the Alpha had become unbreakable. The curse remained, ancient and patient, but it had been challenged, weakened, and now contained within the strength of those who refused to yield. And in that quiet, golden morning, Elijah understood fully what she had become. Not just a guardian, not just a ward, but a force of light, courage, and hope in a world long dominated by shadows. The Alpha, once untouchable and distant, now stood beside her as a partner, a protector, and perhaps, in time, something more. And as the pup giggled softly in his sleep, reaching for them both, the castle seemed to sigh, as though acknowledging a new dawn, one forged from bravery, compassion, and the unthinkable act of a single, extraordinary girl. The shadows would return, as shadows always do. The curse might stir again, but for the first time in centuries, the Alpha's bloodline, the castle, and the pup's future were no longer defined by fear. They were defined by courage, love, and the bond that could endure even the darkest magic. And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the glistening stone towers, the Alpha, Elijah, and the pup stood together, a trio bound by fate, bravery, and an unbreakable connection that promised hope for all who dwelled within the ancient castle. The future, uncertain but bright, waited for them, and they would face it together.